Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Creating Engaging Science Instructional Videos. I am Nathan, and I have my friend and very special guest on today, Dr. Jason Crean. Welcome, Jason. Thanks for being
Hello.
here today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And just so you can get to know Jason a little bit and know about his work, Jason is a biology educator. He has won a lot of awards, so it's really an honor to be able to have him on today. He is the recipient of the Presidential Award for Excellence in Math and Science Teaching. He is also an NSTA Distinguished Teacher recipient. He is an NGSS, and for all of you non-sciencey folks, that stands for the Next Generation Science Standards. I'm sure most of the people on today will be familiar with the NGSS. But you are NGSS Biology Storylining Working Group Leader. You are the past president for the Illinois Science Teachers Association, an all-species education consultant, and I know just science guru and lover of animals. And I hear, rumor has it that you even have some friends kind of hanging out with you today.
Yep, I have a few.
So they will, I guess, emerge at the right time if they're behaving. So
yes, yeah, we'll see.
So let me talk about a little bit, just get us started on what we are here to chat about. We are here to look at how to create instructional videos, specifically around science. So that's where Jason's really going to take us on a journey about how to plan for effective science lessons, and then look at the context of creating an instructional video. So that's what we are going to accomplish in the next hour. Now, for all of you who are joining us, I can see you're already in the chat. Hello, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are joining from. Feel free to use the chat to interact with each other, to connect, ask questions. It's exactly A-okay. We want you to do that. If you have a question that you would like for us to address in our webinar today, feel free to use the Q&A question, ask a question button. And what you do is click on that button, you ask a question, and then you can all vote for the question that you want to hear asked. And the question that has the most votes, that would be the question that we will get to at the end of today. So let's go ahead and get started. Jason, I will let you kind of take over and share a little bit about your science teaching background.
Okay, so I've taught for 25 years at the high school level biology. I've taught for 15 years in the college and university level, both biology and training pre-service science teachers. There we go. I've been also heavily involved in the informal science education world through the Chicago Zoological Society, running science teacher workshops for K-12, actually pre-K-12 for a long time. I do workshops in professional learning around phenomenon-driven storylines, especially. We've been doing that for several years now. After working directly with some of the gurus when it comes to three-dimensional science teaching and learning. Yeah, so I have a lot of jobs, and this is my life's work and blood, so.
That's amazing. Well, I appreciate your work. You are doing a lot in the science community, so I am very thankful for you. And I'm also excited about learning some things from you today. So whenever we're looking at, Jason, planning for science instruction, you know, it's fun just to jump right into the instructional videos, but obviously there are some key components we have to consider first. So talk to us a little bit about this kind of planning and then the NGSS framework.
And let me preface this by saying, if you're in a non-NGSS adopting state, it doesn't matter, because it's just plain good pedagogy. It puts students in the driver's seat in the science classroom, and that's where we want them. So traditionally, and I can speak to this because almost 20 years of my career was done engaged in traditional science teaching, and that was where we asked students to learn about facts, and they would take a multiple choice test, and then they'd move on. And that has not served us well, really, as a society. It takes a real quick trip to social media to realize that people can argue about science, and neither side seems to know what they're talking about. So, we want to make our students, prepare them for everything that we can after they leave us, and whether that be college or career or just being a good science citizen. All around this is good pedagogy. Our focus is always what are students figuring out, not what are they learning about. We don't want to focus on learning about facts. We know from the other disciplines that skill and application is critical. And in science, we can really tackle those things around phenomena that are real to kids and allows them to anchor their learning to something that they want to figure out that's real. I hear all the time, by the time students get to me at the freshman level, that they're bad at science. And I will say that I hear the same thing from my undergrads who are in my non-major science course. They're terrified of my course. And my goal is to undo as much damage as I possibly can, so that they at least have a healthy respect for science when they leave me. So we really want to give them a good experience, and that involves removing obstacles. When it comes to things like vocab, biology especially has always been very heavy in vocab, and we've actually used vocabulary as an indicator of learning, which it shouldn't be. It's been a barrier more than anything. So we really want students to be able to look at science holistically and figure things out instead of memorizing things that they're not going to retain. And also the lack of context. That's what phenomena is for. Anchoring student learning around phenomena that is engaging and elicits their own questions. That's critical if you're going to have students that are deeper thinkers and problem solvers.
Absolutely. I really like what you said about the mindset. I know as a former science teacher, we often joke that we have like the biology teachers and the physical science teachers, and we have two kind of different thoughts, kind of how we think. And so you're definitely more on the natural sciences and the tangible, but there's also a lot of misconceptions around science too, and even that is a misconception. There's not just biology people and chemistry, physics people. I think there are levels of all kinds of types of science. But just like, in math, about mathematical mindsets, I think we also have science mindsets too. We have to really challenge this kind of negative connotation around science is hard, or science is complex, or science is abstract. So I appreciate that you obviously put that out there in the very beginning.
Yeah, we really want to engage students in those three dimensions, which is not just the content piece, but also the cross-cutting concepts, how students think, recognize patterns or whatnot, as well as the practices. And the practices really should be at the forefront, because those spans across the sciences, those actually span beyond the sciences. So there's a lot that students can do.
Definitely. So Jason, talk to us about some design tips when we're thinking about creating, obviously this series was developed in response to blended learning, with distance learning, with digital learning, whatever your district is calling this right now, where students are accessing content from a distance, but obviously can be done in person as well. That's the beauty of a blended learning model. What are some design tips that you have for those who are thinking about creating instructional videos in science?
So it actually isn't that far off from what I do in the classroom. I'm not going to stand up in front of the students and tell them things for an hour. I used to do that. It was terrible. But I've since seen the light. So it really is about chunking things into manageable, I don't want to say sales pitch, but that's kind of what it is. Like, here's the context. Here's what we're looking at. Here's the phenomenon that we're going to figure out. And then allowing them to go off and do some figuring out, and then pulling them back together in order to share and see how different students have figured out the same problem. We focus on the big ideas. I'm not, like I said in in the previous slide, I'm not going to hold them to whether they know a vocab word or not. They should be acquiring vocab in the moment when they're doing the figuring out where it's meaningful and they need to use that word in order to convey that scientific information. But I'm going to focus on those big ideas, not specific pieces. I always include a personal touch. So this is probably where I need to introduce somebody. But my students often don't know what's coming, and they'll tune in just to see who my special guest is. I have many animals. I run a zoology program, and I'll introduce him here. That's Sirius Black. Sirius Black is a black palm cockatoo. He's about 10 months old, almost 11 months old. He's breaking through a walnut there. And I use these animals in a variety of ways. It's very easy to talk about things like evolution and adaptations and, ecology and behavior, things like that. And you'll see a little bit of an example of that as we progress through the presentation today. But if you hear nuts hitting the floor, that's what he's doing there. He's quite messy.
I'm sure there's a fun story behind the name Sirius Black as well.
Yes, he lives up to the Harry Potter characters.
That's fantastic. Well, I'm glad Sirius is a part of our webinar today.
Yep. And so we lead with engaging phenomena, and the phenomena we know is effective if the students are asking the right questions. We don't tend to want to. He's very messy. We don't tend to want students. We don't want to show them something that we just think is cool. We want to show them a phenomenon that's actually going to get them thinking in the right direction. That's going to lead the learning. And so we'll have some examples of that throughout today too.
Absolutely. Well, let's go ahead and talk about some of those essential elements of instructional videos. At Jason, we've been doing this series in a variety of different content areas. We've had Dr. Kenneth Kunz with literacy. We've had Dennis Sharon with math, and then you with science. And it's so interesting to see there's some similarities in the content areas, but specifically for science, I really appreciate how you have structured these different essential elements for instructional videos, because I think it really speaks to the language around figuring out as opposed to learning about.
Right. Leading with phenomena, and it's funny because I was just in a meeting and teachers are concerned that with remote learning now that they're going to have to go back to what they were doing before because that's safe. But really, this is the opportunity to really shift your teaching and improve your engagement of students. And that always starts with phenomena. The example I included here is from our penguin storyline. We have a penguin storyline that's about 4 weeks long. And I will link these. We have a link for all the storylines at the end of the presentation if you have a question about anything you see today. But we look at a phenomenon of the extinct penguin species, which were huge. They were like 5 feet tall. And we have Dr. Julia Clark who talks in this clip about how they discovered it, the team that discovered it. We're very aware of the scientists that we represent. We want a variety, a diverse set of scientists that the students are introduced to. Like women, like people of color, we want all of them represented as best we can throughout the curriculum. And it's not hard to find. We want to get away from the fact that scientists are seen as old white men in lab coats, because that's not the reality of the scientific world.
Exactly.
Sorry?
I was saying exactly right, yeah.
And Dr. Julia Clark is a great representative. If you've ever seen her in the media, it's often talking about avian dinosaurs and that sort of thing. So kids, of course, love to hear about that. But she talks about the different types of extinct penguins and what we know about them and how they were discovered. And that leads us into a whole series of figuring out activities throughout those 4 weeks. One of these is what I'm presenting here on the video is the actual stud book for all Humboldt penguins that have ever lived in a North American zoo. And this is a huge amount of data, but students and actually most adults probably don't know how organized the breeding programs are for these endangered species in today's zoos and how critically important they are. And so, students will work through this data in order to answer questions like who's the father of this one, or who's the mother of this one, or does this one have siblings, and that sort of thing. So there's lots of different things that we can do with the data that's available, but it all comes from that spark. It all comes from that phenomenon.
Well, shall we, do you want to jump into the phenomena right now? Or I guess we should jump into planning first.
Yeah, so that's the phenomena. So the planning really comes from the standards. There's a lot of misconceptions about NGSS. States have adopted it in different ways, and there's just a lot of misinterpretation when it comes to the standards. And rightly so, to a point, because it is so heavy. It's deeper learning, and that's hard to sum up in a checklist type standard, right? Which is not what NGSS is. So we start with the standards, we look at the big ideas, we bundle them together around phenomena that make sense. If you're looking at the penguin phenomenon, you can talk about ecology and behavior and how penguins live and what jobs they do and things like that. You can talk about evolution and how today's species came to be. You can talk about genetics and how we use genetics to answer scientific questions about penguins in zoos, for example. And you can talk about cells and molecules and what do penguins eat and how do they use that to get energy. So you can really talk about all the big ideas. You can branch out to the other sciences as well and bring those in. If you're talking about fossils, perfect opportunity to bring in earth science and things like that. So we bundle the standards around those phenomena so that we have a clear picture of where we want students to go. And then we decide on the anchoring phenomena that's going to get those questions, that's going to get those students asking the questions that are going to drive that learning. And then throughout the story, whether you're online or whether you're in a classroom, we post driving questions. We don't post objectives because in science, that gives away the punchline, and science is about discovery. And so those driving questions, and this is intuitive to me, but it isn't to everybody, and I had to really get over this hump, but posting driving questions, when you see a question, whether you want to answer it or not, you do in your head, right? You at least consider it. You can't control it. And so we want to foster that in kids, and we want to make sure that we're focused on that. So, using a phenomenon, engaging students in sense-making around that phenomenon, identifying related phenomena that then they could transfer their knowledge and apply their knowledge to, and then ask more questions, and where that will lead them to the next piece of the storyline.
Jason, it's so interesting because when you look at a driving question and the last bullet point where you had said post driving questions for their objective, I like to think about whenever we're looking at a driving question, all of the things that we need to know to answer the driving question, to me, those become the mini learning objectives for the lesson. So I love how we look at this kind of frame of a driving question and think about, like, what do I need to know to be able to answer that question? And then that starts your investigation.
Yep, exactly. And so we lead with phenomena, and phenomena, teachers are entering this world at different paces, right? I was lucky in that I had an early experience where this training, but even after 200 hours of training, I was convinced this wasn't going to work. So I had to really grow as a professional and be open-minded about changing my practice, and it would be impossible for me to ever go back now. Because typically I would use this and lead the learning with the phases of mitosis. I'm sure we've all learned this. We memorize this, we spit it back out on the paper, and then at the end of the unit, we'll talk often about, and if it goes wrong, it's cancer. But leading with cancer or some other type of thing like the phenomenon that is coming up here, there you go, that's Day. And Day is, he was known as the tree man. He passed away a few years ago. But he basically had a strain of HPV that he acquired through a cut on his leg that led to these just enormous warts all over his body. And this gets kids' attention, but they ask a lot of questions, like how did this happen? Could this happen to me? And this gives us an opportunity to really talk about the phenomenon and then the science that brings it along, right? So this is the result of mitosis gone haywire, just like cancers are, for example. But if we lead with those phenomena that the kids are figuring out, they're going to get much deeper into this than they would if they were just memorizing, cells. And it goes across the board, like physics. I remember sitting in physics classes and memorizing the equations or writing them on a card and then trying to figure out the problem. But by the time I got done with that, I didn't have a strong, and I still don't have a very strong foundation when it comes to these things. But if you can lead with phenomena like race car drivers crashing into a wall, for example, or monster trucks crushing each other, all these different types of things, you can start talking about those forces and what it takes to make a car look like this. What boy doesn't like to see cars crash together? And then for years, almost 20 years, I taught this equation and had to memorize it. And that was about this as the extent of where we could go. But we never really talked about how did this tree get its mass. And if you haven't seen the YouTube video where they're interviewing Harvard grads as they're coming, with their caps and gowns, they hand them a log and they ask them, where did this log get its mass? And the answers are hilarious. They are absolutely hilarious. And when they even ask some of them, well, what if I told you that it got it from the air? And they say, one of them even says, well, that would be disturbing. But that's where, carbon dioxide, that's where, so if we talk about, like, how did this tree get its mass? How did this enormous thing get its mass if it's not eating any food, which is what they associate energy with? It gives us a whole opportunity for students to do the figuring out instead of just the learning about the equation.
It is such a different approach from the way I started teaching as well. I was one of those that was, again, with physics and chemistry, very focused on periodic table and equations, and being able to figure out how in the natural world we get very curious about things that happen. And so to be able to transform our teaching it to really start from the phenomenon and then be able to work our discovery through that lens. And obviously the equations, like you said, have a whole different meaning. We make those personal connections and we're able to start with the phenomenon.
Mm-hmm. So phenomena takes on different forms, obviously. It could be, teachers at home doing these demos are interesting, but this is one example here of, if you're talking about pressure, for example, you can do a demo at home for your students so that they can see how this works. Another form is, and this is a video clip that's actually online. Don't try this at home. But they had steam cleaned this, the inside of this tanker truck, and they had sealed it, and then this is what happened. The pressure caved in on itself. And so this is a very elaborate, phenomenon on pressure. And then this here with, students blowing up balloons, they, even just talking about the fact that air is stuff, right? Air is matter is something that's hard for students to understand. So, using things like this as phenomena where students are engaged in the phenomena is also effective. So there's lots of different ways to do this.
Absolutely. And then obviously different grade bands are going to have different phenomena that connect to those science concepts that we are tackling for that grade level too.
Mm-hmm. So I'm always of the thoughts that how should I put this? No bad news before fourth grade. But the natural world is brutal, right? It's a tough place to live. But we want to be very aware of the phenomena that we're using with K2 versus 912, for example. So if we're looking at why some animals live in groups, for example, which is an NGSS idea concept, students have seen meerkats before, most likely on TV or clips. They're very gregarious. So we can ask students, why do you think they live together? And their behavior is very human-like when they're standing up looking for predators and watching out for each other. We can then graduate to the next grade band where we look at leaf-cutting ants, and they're getting together because they're providing food for each other and gathering food, for example. Zebras, why do zebras hang out together? Those herbivore animals, those big herbivores, and that's vigilance, more eyes, watch for predators and things like that. And the first day of the semester for me is actually showing them a clip where these lions are hunting a water buffalo and talking about, having students ask questions about why do lions live in groups versus the water buffalo living in groups. It's very different. But that vertical building over time gets to that concept, and they get to see that this is how these species have adapted over long periods of time. Now they can go outside if they're remote learning, or if you're in the schoolyard, and ask them to find animals that live in groups and why they think animals are living in groups. It's not hard to find an anthill. It's not hard to see a bee. It's not hard to find a group of birds flying overhead. But really getting students to think about those things are important.
Absolutely. And one thing to add, Jason, just on the WeVideo side, within our platform, we have 1 million assets of stock media, and you can type in any of the animals that you're seeing here, and you're able to find a collection of videos or stills. So even if the students, don't have the opportunity to see a meerkat outside their window, they're able to find those and be able to create their own experiences and kind of craft these videos using some of the assets and content that we have.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so pausing. Now, I will have the students pause me so that they can go out and do an investigation or do those things. But I also want them pausing to think about the questions that they're going to ask, right? I want them to really be thoughtful as far as what questions they're going to ask and share, and that they will be presenting those questions to each other. And so, that eliminates a lot of the tangential questions that we sometimes get from students at the higher level. But we do want to make sure that we're giving students a voice. And so that's really important when it comes to questioning. So, we're asking them to question, but we really want them to pause and think about what questions came up as they were looking at that phenomenon.
And I feel like giving them this opportunity helps them raise questions that maybe we didn't anticipate that they would ask. And so I think it's always important, because we can't predict or anticipate those questions. So it's important that we allow them that opportunity.
Yep. Now, in the classroom, we do driving question boards, but there is a myriad of online tools that you can do the exact same thing with. We have students write questions on their Post-its and put them on the question board, and then we all talk about how we can organize these questions by concept or theme or whatnot. And so these are all questions that the students have asked that will ultimately drive the learning. Now, we're all teachers. We know that we need a plan, right? We can't just say, well, we're going to have to wait to plan our courses for the next few weeks because we need to see what questions students ask. The idea of an effective anchoring phenomenon is if it gives you those questions. And so, we have field tested our phenomena that we use because we need to make sure that those questions are going to come through. And so every student has a voice, and there's like I said, there's lots of different ways to do this online as well. If you have a learning management system, You can use discussions in order to share questions. There's Padlet and Jamboard. There's just all kinds of different types of platforms that you can use with this.
Definitely. And is that Sirius? Is he also giving his opinion right now?
Yes. He's agreeing with everything I have to say.
Of course. All right, so moving on now to practice.
So when students are, once students get beyond the questioning part, we want them to be actively engaged in figuring out with that phenomenon in mind. One of the most profound things I've ever heard was Dr. Helen Quinn, who led the charge, a world-renowned scientist. She led the charge with the NGSS creation, and she said, hands-on is great, but minds-on is where it's at. And that minds-on idea can take any, like a whole bunch of forms, right? We often don't want to give students a piece of paper and a pencil to do a worksheet. But if we're giving them data where they're figuring things out and actively engaged in analyzing and interpreting data, that's a completely different story, right? So we want to give them those opportunities, that we can. So we want to give them data-driven tasks so that they're figuring stuff out based on the questions that they ask. We want to maintain coherence. We want to make sure that all through these activities that the students understand why they're doing what they're doing. So if we're trying to figure out why lions live in groups, we're going to look at genetics and figure out who makes up the group. Are they related to each other? How do we know? If we're looking at lions here and lions in another part of Africa, like can we figure out if they're related or if they're the same species of lions, things like that. So context is everything. The research on contextual learning is out there. Just you don't have to look very far. It's very well established, and it really does reinforce all of this. So if you have a student who's just outside, like this kid here is, and looking at ants, I don't remember what the next part is. There we go. And students can so K2, we do a lot of observation, and then as we graduate through the grade bands, we look at data collection, and you can have students pull their data together on a Google Doc or whatever it may be. You can have them, do some mapping. Where are the ants moving? Where are they going? There's just so many different opportunities of learning all around us, around phenomena that it's hard to pass up. But as we go up through those grade bands, we want to build on their experience and go deep as we can.
Absolutely. All right, what about pausing and sharing?
So after they've done this, we want them to reflect, kind of think about what they've done, because we want them to share not only what they discovered, but how they discovered it. That process of figuring out is really important, and it will be different from student to student often. And so it's really, really important that students have an opportunity to pause after they've done something, look at what they've done, and then prepare to share that in whatever form that may be. Once again, tons of tech tools out there where they can share their work and present in meaningful ways. But definitely, we want them sharing out what they've done and how they did it.
Absolutely, and I think that's a part. At WeVideo, we believe in students making impact with their voice, and so we want to ensure that students are able to contextualize and then share it through their own lens. Obviously, the data is data. They're able to see the data, but then it's like, okay, what conclusions do I draw, and what does that look like in my own voice?
And so these are some of my students who were sharing in the classroom, but we can do this just as easily with a Google Sheet or whatnot in order to share data across the board.
Absolutely.
So reflection can't go without reflection, because especially when it comes to the 3 dimensions. Now, they've been figuring out the disciplinary core idea, the content piece. They've been figuring that out throughout, right? And there's many that are bundled together in this storyline, for example, that help students create meaning. But when it comes to the science and engineering practices, if I was to show students this list the first day of school and say, you're gonna do all these things, they're overwhelmed. They're like, whoa, look at all those big words, that's pretty intimidating. When I wait until they've done the first storyline and I ask them to reflect on their work and I show them these science and engineering practices, they realize very quickly that not only have they done all of them, they've done all of them repeatedly, and they can give specific examples where they employ these practices in order to sense make. That's hugely, I'm not a crier, but the first time I did this, I was like, whoa, this is overwhelming, you know, because they were really, really reflective when they had this tool in front of them. And the same thing with the cross-cutting concepts. We can actually group those initial questions later in the school year around these cross-cutting concepts. And so if we showed them, like we show a family in Brazil, for example, that has some of the siblings have albinism, they're albino, and some don't. You know, what cross-cutting concept would that be? We show them Tanzanian albinos and plight that they have to go through because there's some really serious sociocultural effects on albinos in the country of Tanzania. What can we show them? Like, what cross-cutting concepts here could help us better understand why those children have the phenotype that they do, cause and effect, you know, things like that. So there's lots of opportunities to figure things out in the human realm, just as much as animals or plants or whatever else we're looking at.
All right, so closure. After we reflected, then we are looking at closing and kind of being able to articulate our learning experience.
So with that, after they've asked questions with the initial phenomena, after they have engaged in some investigation, we can then start to see a clearer picture of why what they did was important. Ask students, like, you know, why is what you did important? How did you come to figure this problem out? How could we use this method that you figured out in order to solve other problems? And then, you know, can we transfer their knowledge to a transfer task, which could be an assessment piece, or can they transfer what they have figured out so far to a new task and start doing some sense making around that? So the next part of our storyline is actually this here, and this is some things that lions might eat. And why would a lion want to hunt in a group versus solo? And it really revolves around energy. And so the students will try to figure out, if they hunt by themselves, it's really hard to get the energy that they need each day. But if they hunt in a group, they can actually get bigger prey and share it with each other. And so there's a lot of math and computational thinking here that comes directly from what they had started to figure out so far about social animals.
All right, one of our favorite quotes, figuring out what we're learning about.
So we know that kids are naturally curious. We don't want to lose that. Through their education and in previous years, we've often lost that over time, mainly because of a focus. You know, to a focus on vocab or a focus on the wrong things. So we want to engage students in discovery, which is that figuring out, and that can take on many forms. It does not mean they have to do a wet lab to figure something out. It could be that they're analyzing and interpreting data from a paper that, you know, was found or whatnot. But we want to make sure that there's coherence across all of these lessons. Why are we doing what we're doing? And we want to constantly keep that in mind. I never ask students, what have we learned today, or what have you learned? I always ask them, what have we figured out, right? This is a group effort. We need everybody's input. So what have we figured out so far that we can then add to our collective knowledge, and how will that help us moving forward in the storyline? You get such different answers when you ask them what they figured out versus what they've learned. Totally different answers. It's really interesting.
All right, fantastic. Well, what I want to do now is, Jason, I want to take your expertise in science and with storylining and show how we can take that experience and create, the teacher experience, create instructional videos for students. So I will jump on into the WeVideo dashboard that you're seeing right now. And first, actually, I want to click on the dashboard so you can see what it looks like when you go into WeVideo. So let's say, Jason, we planned for our lesson, we've determined the phenomenon we're going to focus on, we have our standards, we know the instructional strategies, we have questions, we've done all the planning, but we want to create an instructional video. So I would just click on video there. And if I wanted to actually start with a pre-planned template, we have a template called a mini lesson template. And so we have a lot of templates here, but I want to start with the mini lesson one because it will already have done some of the work for me. So let's go ahead and go into the mini lesson template. And you can see here there are different timelines and layers here. And I know that my face and Jason, well, mainly mine, is covering up the timelines here. But this is sections, instruction, and music. Those are the three timelines you're seeing here. And so if you're familiar with video creation, video editing, everything is layered. And so the things that are on top are the things that we are going to see first and then scaffold on down. Well, with a template, we can edit a lot of the pieces that are already built. And so, for example, for lesson title, we can click on lesson title and I can double click on it and I can rename this. And so I'm going to name this, let's say, form and function. Jason, I saw a really fascinating article on honeybees and how one of a set of bees that a bee farmer was raising, they forgot to basically put them in the hive or the structure. And so they create this beautiful beehive. And so that could be a form of a phenomenon. It being able to say, okay, look at this picture of this beehive. Was it feng shui? Like, what is it? Why would a bee build this? And so let's just say along those lines there of the phenomenon. So of course we have our lesson objectives here, and I can click on these. These are all editable. So today's objectives we will discover. So you can double click and you can change. Obviously, you can write whatever you want there. I'm gonna cancel there. One of my favorite things, though, is to find stock media, because again, I might not have access to bees building a beehive if I'm looking at form and function, and we have over 1 million assets. So if you're curious on where to find those, you just go up to the stock media, and I'm going to type in beehive, and I have a lot of different options to choose from. So if you want to see what a video looks like, you just click on it and you have the preview screen here and you're able to preview what a video looks like. So if I want to find one with the hive, that one looks like it would accomplish what I want students to see. So I would just take out some existing feature or piece that was already in the template, drag this down here. And then if I want to see what it looks like in my preview mode, I would just press play. Now you can hear music in the background. That was music that was already a part of the template. So if I want to change the music, I can definitely do that as well. I can go to audio and I can go and click on different audio options. And so, I don't know, bees make me think it's like kind of like happy. That sounds like fun, so we'll go with that one. So I'm going to do I'm going to the track that we already have there. Just drag this down here, and what happens is that there we go. So, and you can adjust the layers here. Again, my face is covering up the levels here, but you can adjust the levels on the video so you can make this quieter. Now, you'll obviously want to, in an instructional video, you want to have your students see you, and they also want to see maybe images in the background. So if you've done maybe a screen record of a lesson or slide. So I'm going to go into my media, and this is something that I recorded just earlier today, and it is essentially a screen record of you going through your slides, Jason. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this down here. Actually, let's just go ahead and take this out here. I'm going to pull this down here. And so now, let's go to our preview mode. We have some music there, but you don't see my face there. So let me click the record button, and I'm just going to do, let's just do my webcam for now. Let's say I already recorded my slides, and I just want to record myself speaking to my students. So I'm going to say webcam. It's going to ask me to choose my camera and my microphone. That looks good, so start recording. It gives me a 3, 2, 1. I have my message for students. I'm talking through some different aspects. I think that sounds good. I'll press stop. And then I can replay that and preview it. Let's say that I did that and I like it. I'll press save. And so what it does is it automatically will place your video into the timeline. I want to manipulate it here. And so, of course, if I place it on top of my existing slides, it's going to cover that up. So what I want to do is, let's scale this down a little bit. And then that way, if I want to put this, obviously move some over here, I can move it anywhere I want. Save changes. And then now, I have my message for students. I'm talking through some different aspects. There you go. Or if you want to, you can record all of it at once. If you didn't want to record your Google Slides and yourself separately, the same thing, you just go to record, and then this time you say screen and webcam. Next, you go through the same process. You pick everything you want to pick there. I'm going to say that looks good, share, and then go through the process. We won't do it right now, but that's how you essentially, and then when you choose your webcam and your screen, it automatically will put your face at the upper right-hand corner. So you can go back and manipulate if you want to, but it saves you the time of actually going back and resizing your picture. So, and then again, we want to make sure, honoring Jason, the elements that we talked about earlier with pausing and reflecting and sharing. We're able to insert different questions here. Again, you can go to text, and you're able to drag in different text features in. And so let's just say like that one. You can drag this in. And again, everything you can pretty much, everything you can edit the text and so forth. So let's just say you have embedded the questions you want, you've found the stock media, you've found stills, and you're all ready to go. We want to make sure that the students have some kind of prompt or closure. It's something that inspires them to go and create a video or do something with that. Then you'll have your closure piece there. So maybe it's posting something in Google Classroom. And then when you're ready, you'll want to go up to finish. Oh, I'm drafting I'm fixing a template right now. So it is thinking I want to do that. So let me go back to my dashboard, show you this. Let's go here. Let's show you another one I've done here. Okay, so just another video I've created. I was doing a gardening video. So whenever you're ready to be done and finish and share it with your students, you just click the finish button, and you can title it whatever you want. Maybe it's, form and function, honeybee, crazy looking hive, whatever you want to name it. But then you have an option of choosing video, audio only, or GIF. So if you want to make it a podcast, just for their hearing your voice, you can choose that, and it takes the video out. Or you can choose GIF, which is nice if you want to embed it into a Google slide or a short 45-second clip, and you want students to access it that way. You can choose a GIF. You can choose SD or HD. Right now, of course, this video isn't much, so there's not much of a choice of thumbnail. You can normally choose 3 different kind of prominent points in your video as a thumbnail. Once you export it, you can change that later. So you say export, and then it goes through the process and it lets you know when your video is finished. So there you go. There's a really quick kind of rundown. we definitely encourage you, if you haven't had a chance to check out WeVideo, we'd love for you to check us out. I am showing my WeVideo.com community page right now. Jeremy's in the chat today, and he is our community manager. We'd love to have you connect with other educators using WeVideo, other educators who are creating instructional videos and being able to add them to your PLN, your professional learning network. So all you do is go to community there, and you can join the community. And of course, check us out. You can jump into a trial and learn how to create instructional videos and be able to experience the power of WeVideo. So with the last part of today, I think we can jump on into some questions here. So I am going to check out my questions. It's like the biggest, or the most prominent question is, or the one with the most votes. How are you planning on structuring your class when group or lab work will likely be difficult in the fall due to distancing regulations? Thoughts there, Jason?
Yeah, it's not ideal, so we have to do our best. When we are doing shared data or group work, we use our learning management system that helps facilitate that. Once again, many tools out there that can help with that. And then sharing data. We have capabilities where students have to post their data before they can see other data. And I know there's some tools around that. I don't want to plug any one tool here, but suffice it to say that we'll be using some of those tools to enable that.
Absolutely. It will be difficult. I think, I know a lot of districts are planning for, what this looks like in a blended learning environment. How are we able to interface maybe digitally and online with some experiences? I've seen students be able to do some, I know you can't do lots of things at home, maybe especially with chemistry and physics. We might need some access to other tools, but I've seen simulations that work really, really well. So I think there will be definitely some options there.
Yep.
Awesome. Next question, how do you decide where to start? And then follow up, how did you come up with the penguin phenomena? Where does a chemistry physics teacher start? So kind of three similar, but also kind of separate questions there.
Yeah, they all have the same answer, basically the standard. So, we look at usually we start with a priority, like what's the big idea that we want to get students to? And then we start looking for phenomena that will engage the students to get there, but also we want a phenomenon that's going to help us bundle ideas from across the standards so that they aren't just learning this one single standard across a storyline. So, when we came up with the penguin phenomena, I will tell you that the penguin phenomenon changed. You can't get married to a phenomenon because it may not get the questions that you need from the kids. It may not be effective as an anchor. And so we ended up changing it to this clip of Dr. Julia Clark talking about, how they discovered this ancient penguin. And so chemistry and physics, it's really the same thing. You'll find a standard that you want to get across to the kids, and you find an anchor that's going to get them asking those right questions. It takes practice. It's highly collaborative and iterative. So work with colleagues, whether you have colleagues in the school that you can work with, or a community online, some kind of network that you have. Collaborate and share as much as you can, because you can't do this stuff in a vacuum. It's really social work.
I'm so glad you said that, and especially as secondary teachers. Both of us being secondary teachers, having that background, we're so very connected with our content. I feel like sometimes we forget that there are others that we can collaborate with, and we should be leveraging the strengths and talents of others. And just because, we do science a certain way, doesn't mean we can't include the strategies of others, and we should be doing those. So absolutely.
Keep a focus on the practices. Think about what the variety of practices that are needed for students, but don't force them. You know, if students are figuring out something, those practices should come naturally and organically.
Absolutely. All right, let's look at the next question here. Let's see, what are more ways to reinforce their learning about figuring out the deriving questions? How can we make our classrooms more tactile and make them see the world through their own eyes without too much direction? That was from Lauren.
So that's a big, lofty philosophical question, right? And I love those questions. The first step I had to take in order to get here was I had to trust that my students could actually do it without me telling them what to do. Giving them the phenomena, giving them data that they can figure out up front instead of me front-loading information, that was very, very hard for me to let go of. And I know that's an issue with many science teachers who are trying to shift to this phenomenon-driven learning model. So, I mean, I don't have a specific answer, but once you trust your students to be able to figure out phenomena and ask questions without giving them the answer, you're going to see, I shouldn't be surprised, but to this day, I'm just always surprised at the work that my kids can do without front loading. So.
Yeah, it's being back in the world of instructional design. I remember creating driving questions was particularly challenging because normally we would start from a place of maybe learning objectives and somehow try to convert learning objectives into driving questions. And we always went back to, was it Googleable? If it was, then that's not a good driving question. There needs to be something that is connected to the student experience, connected to the local community, something that was very, very specific and couldn't be answered in a sentence or a word. It had to be shared through multiple experiences. So I think it has to be developed in a collaborative context. It can't just be taking a learning objective or standard and turning it into a question. The learning experience we want.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. So we have Sonia says, so the questions and phenomena come before objectives. How do you satisfy the administrative need of objective posted on the board before everybody begins?
Yeah, as a consultant, I've worked with a lot of school districts, and it's just as much learning for the administration as it is the teachers. Science is not necessarily like other disciplines. Not what works for one course may not work for another discipline, right? So we've had to educate administrators on really what they should be looking for in the science classroom, and the essence of a science classroom is starting with questions and ending with questions. And so, we want to focus that. What we do recommend is that you can have objectives for the teachers on your staff that are nested underneath those driving questions. And and really just explaining to an administrator, this is how we do it in science, this is why it's important, and we want students figuring out and having that deeper learning experience. It is really, really important that we educate our leadership on that.
Absolutely, and I think that it's always well-intentioned to have, the learning objective of the board was a response to ensuring that students know where they're going. But obviously just placing an objective on the board doesn't satisfy that. It's about the kinds of conversations that students are having, the products that students are creating, the investigations that they're exploring, and so forth. And can be reinforced by continually pointing back to, why are we here? What are we doing, and why are we doing it? So,
absolutely.
Yeah. All right, I think this is last question for today. This is from Samantha. What would be the best method to acquire data from our local resources, such as museums or arboretums, to either incorporate into the lesson or even change the storyline a bit in order to make the storyline fit the data?
Ask. Simple answer, ask. Early in my career, I was intimidated by scientists, and I'm not a scientist, so I can't get scientific data. When I started working in the informal science world, especially with zoos, I had a geneticist ask me if I wanted to volunteer in her lab and cut out chromosomes. And I said, sure, of course, because you know me, I don't say no. That's why I have 12 jobs. So I talked to her and I said, the stories that you're telling about your research are so compelling. We need to share these with students. And she was practically jumping up and down that we wanted to incorporate her work into classrooms. And so in our storylines, we have some of her work, like the lion genetic research and things like that is all from her work. Scientists are excited often to share their work. There are problems sometimes when it comes to publishing, and that they can't share data that's not published. Sometimes you can code the data. We did that with our lion alleles. We coded them with letters instead of numbers so that it wasn't published, but we could still use it and get the kids to figure out the same problem. But just reaching out and asking and saying, I'm a teacher, I want to incorporate your work into my classroom. What type of data do you have that's available? Sometimes they'll send you their published papers. Sometimes they'll have you come for a visit. There's all kinds of things, but it never hurts to ask. The worst thing they'll say is, I can't. But honestly, ask.
And do you feel like, I know most they call it informal ed using museums. Most museums are very willing to help because their mission is to educate and inspire young people. So from my experience, I have seen that they are more than willing to help, or at least ask someone else to see if they can help in the process.
Yeah, and it depends. Like if you can explain to them what you want to do with their data, which is what I did with the penguin stud book data that I had showed earlier in the presentation. I reached out and I said, we're doing a whole unit on this penguin species, and we're going to teach the kids all about evolution and ecology and genetics and all the big ideas in life science. Can we have your data? And they were like, of course, like why wouldn't we offer this data? And so, we're working towards that. As long as you can explain to them like why it's meaningful, absolutely.
Fantastic. Well, we are at the end of our time, but before we went, I wanted to make sure that everyone could stay connected with you. And so here is your contact info I will put up here. So we can just contact you for any questions or follow you on Twitter. And
Sorry.
No.
She wanted to say hi, yeah.
We have to say hi before we go. We have to say hi.
This is Lily.
Lily's beautiful.
Yeah. Very interested in the screen.
Now, what is Lily?
Lily's a green aracari. That's the smallest member of the toucan family. She's actually attacking my face on the screen, but
oh, she's beautiful.
Yeah, she's a hoot.
Well, I want to put this up one last time so people can stay connected. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. Thank you for your questions. We are so excited about staying connected with all of you and hearing about the progress you're making with blended learning and remote learning. And we want to see your science instructional videos and make sure that you tag us, make sure that when you share them out on Twitter that we can see them and we can share those out as well. Thank you, Jason, so much for being here today.
Thank you. I appreciate this. This was fun.
Absolutely. And thank you, everyone. I hope you all have a wonderful day. See you soon.